Um, all right, so class, this is my soon-to-be friend. We don't know each other yet, Will Drucker. And Will is going to tell us his whole story, much like all the other entrepreneur interviews. And Will, they have one of these every week where I talk to somebody from my sort of larger ecosystem of people about sort of how they came to think that it was okay to start something themselves as opposed to, taking whatever job, and what they've started and what they've done. So that's kind of the frame we'll take on our conversation for the next few minutes, if that works for you.
Sounds great.
So we always start with, where are you from?
So I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, but I'm currently in Vermont, which has long been a place I've wanted to move for lots of reasons, but was living most recently in Brooklyn, New York, until the pandemic, when my wife and I moved up to Vermont, where we were fixing up a little house. So.
Oh, and where in Vermont? Where are you?
In southern Vermont, a town called Manchester.
Oh, yeah, cool. So the students already know this, but I lived in Boston for 10 years and have good friends who went to UVM, and spent a fair amount of time going back and forth to Vermont. So I'm familiar with and miss that part of the world. Just for the background on the basis of the conversation, I'm from Eastern Kentucky. I grew up in a town of 4,500 people in Eastern Kentucky. So my proclivity for and love of whiskey is probably genetic. So we'll talk a little bit more in a minute about how yours came to be. But okay, so you grew up in Chicago, and where did you go to undergrad?
I went to Middlebury College in Middlebury, Vermont for undergrad.
Yeah. A friend of mine, Kate Conliff, who's my business partner, went to Middlebury.
Yeah, it's fun. The distillery, actually, where I make all the split spirits, is in Middlebury. It didn't exist when I went to school there, so it's just sort of a fun coincidence that I find myself back there on a regular basis to make my
yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's so fun. Okay, so what was your major?
I majored in neuroscience. It's a little different than what I'm doing right now.
I majored in biology and chemistry. So, we find our ways to things from all kinds of angles. So you have a newly minted neuroscience degree, and then what?
So not too dissimilar to the undergrads who are in school and graduating right now. I graduated in the throes of the Great Recession, so early 2009. I was fortunate enough to have based on an internship I had the previous summer at a sustainable architecture and urban planning firm. I had a job lined up, and it didn't start till May, but I graduated in February. Middlebury has an interesting program where you can start a semester late, and then you end, obviously, a semester late as well. And I know a lot of undergrads are sort of taking their own, gap years or gap semesters right now, just given everything that's going on. But, something I, was really glad I was able to do, allowed me to do a little living rather than go right from high school to college. And yeah, so I studied neuroscience. I made a decision, even if I knew, or I should say, despite knowing that it was unlikely I was actually going to pursue it as a profession. I'm sure, that's not the advice I would necessarily give everybody, but, I know a lot of people who studied one thing and, followed their interests and passions, which I think tend to be a better indicator of what you're going to, be successful at because it's something you care about. So I made the decision to study neuroscience because I felt like it was something that was just deeply interesting. I was curious to learn about it. And, even in the 12 years since I graduated, it's, the field has flourished and grown, and it's cool to learn about all the new things that are coming out. But, it was really just a curiosity to learn about something that, humans, even in the fairly modern time, we're still just scratching the surface on. And that curiosity, I think, really has carried through all the twists and turns of my career up to this point, and my inspiration for starting Split Spirits. But so that's what I did sort of for my academic focus. But I was always really interested in sustainability, so I was very involved in the the student environmental organization, and for some of your undergrads who may be familiar with different environmental organizations, a lot of the people that I had the good fortune to meet with and do really cool stuff with on campus and within the state, ended up starting 350.org, which is a pretty prominent environmental organization. So it's so basically I was able to pursue my personal interest in sustainability, just through extracurricular activities, and helped organize a lot of interesting things on that front, while still focusing on academics in a different area. So and that's the common thread through everything I've done, including the first job I had out of college, working at the sustainable architecture firm in Chicago, and the handful of things I've done between that and starting Split Spirits.
So, sustainable architecture firm, what were the sort of rocks you hopped on across the stream that led you to Split Spirits?
Yeah, so I should mention that because I had a job lined up in May, I was able to save up some money, from working during college, and so I basically had a window to, before my job started. So I decided to take an adventure. I, with a good buddy of mine from college, packed up my bicycle, all my climbing equipment, hiking boots, and we headed to South America, where my brother was actually an exchange student. So we got to see him, which was lovely. But we basically, did a bike trip throughout the Andes in Argentina and Patagonia. We got to do some really cool climbs. We did volunteering at this huge estancia, which is basically like a ranch where they were removing fences and trying to rehabilitate local flora and fauna, essentially with the aim of turning it into a national park. So it was a really fun way to have an adventure before going to the office and having a regular job. But basically from there, each step of the way sort of informed how I wanted to pursue sustainability. So one of the main things that I took away from my sustainable architecture and urban planning gig was that, for better or for worse, the people with the money tend to make the rules, and whether that's in an architecture firm, it's the client that gets to decide how extensively they want to incorporate sustainability components in their home or office building or neighborhood, if you're looking in the urban planning context. So initially I thought, well, it would be interesting to sort of be an enlightened client and start like a development company where I could then work out the financial aspect of things such that you could have a win-win where you have an economically successful project, but that also incorporates some really radical sustainability components that offer long-term savings, whether it's incorporating renewable energy or super efficient features in the building, or situating it in a way that's really transit oriented. So consider that, and then an opportunity popped up through just a colleague of mine who was also interested in sustainability to basically help this manufacturing company start a corporate social responsibility program. And in my mind, I thought, well, that's that's very different than approaching sustainability from a design perspective. But again, looking at the opportunity for impact, I could have a role at a global corporation that had a dozen manufacturing facilities across the world. And I thought, okay, this isn't the Patagonia of the world. This is a company that has a lot of room for improvement. And I think I can go in and find people who are champions, who care about the environment, who want to help make, positive changes across the company. And so that's what I did. It started basically as an internship and evolved into a full-time position and then a department, and had a chance to work with lots of different people across the company, everyone from the CEO to general managers in different regions of the world to, plant managers and, line workers. So it was a really cool way to, one, understand how, larger organization worked. It had something like 7,000 employees, revenues of about 2 billion. And they made industrial food processing equipment and airline ground support equipment.
Of course they did.
So very different focus in terms of, the day-to-day, but the goal remained the same, which is how do we take this organization and the way of doing things and make it better and do it in a way that also serves the business bottom line. So how can we improve efficiency? How can we reduce our reliance on resources? How can we improve manufacturing processes that, improve the quality and reduce the cost of the things we're making, but also leave the world a little better place, and also get people involved. And one of the things that I really learned is that there are always people, even the most unassuming places, that care about sustainability in one way or another and want to get involved, on a volunteer basis after their regular shift is up to make a difference. And usually that's where the best ideas come from. It's the people that are closest to, where things are being made. And it was a really cool opportunity to create those communities across the company and bring these initiatives to awareness and see the excitement and creativity around making improvements, in how we made jet bridges, the things that we used to get on the airplanes, and, if you abstract it, it applies to anything that we do. There's always ways to improve what we do. And that was a really cool opportunity. I also was able to go to grad school at night, which didn't leave me with a whole lot of time, but was a great opportunity to, learn. I went to business school, so I was able to sort of learn the language of, the executive leadership team, which I found was really important in translating the work I was doing into the things that they cared about and their goals as set by the board and the shareholders. So for me, it was almost really approaching it as like a language class, learning the grammar, the vocabulary of how, the people who were making the decisions, how they interacted and understood what they were doing, just so I could be a better advocate for the changes I saw that needed to be made. So that was a great opportunity. And then, a common theme you'll notice, I love adventure travel. So I decided to quit my job. I met my then girlfriend, now current wife. She was in architecture school and was working a couple jobs on the side. And, we were kind of ready to switch locations. We had been in Chicago. We had a great group of friends, but we both were really eager to explore new horizons and adventure while we had the relative flexibility to do so. So we, worked hard, saved up money, and then as sort of a farewell to the Midwest, we rode our bicycles down the Mississippi River. So we quit our jobs, put everything in storage, and literally had my graduation party the same night as we set our alarms for 5 a.m. to hop on a little plane up to Thunder Bay at the border between Minnesota and Canada, where we started our bike trip, where we, crossed the border into Canada, dipped our wheels in Rainy Lake, and then headed down south to the headwaters of the Mississippi, and then followed the Mississippi all the way past New Orleans. So that was an amazing trip, great way to, understand where I'm from, my home, in a very different way, and understand America. So that was a really cool experience. And then we ended up in New York, where actually through a connection of mine from JBT, which is the corporation that I've been working at for CSR. He let me know that he had recently started working for a company that was had developed a process for taking waste tires, basically end of life tires, and essentially reverse engineering them to pull out some of the component materials. So the steel, the fiber, the material called carbon black, and then a bunch of different synthetic oils, and then reprocessing those materials to sell as a recycled alternative to the virgin options. So that was it was really cool because I having worked at a larger corporation, realized that I wanted to be a little bit more customer focused, and in a smaller team where I was able to get involved in everything from the marketing to the production to the sales to the making decisions at a higher level. So joined Boulder Industries, and again, totally changed. I didn't know a thing about what happened to tires, after they were taken off a car when I started, and so it was a cool opportunity to learn a completely new industry. And ultimately we were able to speak with companies like Michelin, who are making tires, who had set commitments to using recycled materials, working with the likes of Ford and Toyota, who had set commitments to using recycled materials in their cars, and reducing the use of virgin materials. Big rubber compounders that then sold their sort of raw mixed rubber to make everything from Yeti cooler handles to paddles for industrial, like ag equipment. So it was a pretty interesting industry, one I had never envisioned myself in, but where there was a huge possibility for impact. Just to kind of put it in perspective, tires are designed to be extremely durable because they're required to keep us safe when we're driving around, but that same durability creates a really huge challenge when they've basically come to the end of their useful life, because they've been designed to be extremely hard to break down. And it was really interesting to work with a company that was taking essentially a very challenging waste material that up until this process was really being dealt with in about two different ways: either burning them, which is similar to burning coal, so terrible for the environment, or basically shredding them and putting them in a landfill where they're not breaking down anytime soon. So essentially going from essentially taking a waste product that was really challenging from a disposal standpoint to recycling them in a way that provided companies that were embracing sustainability with a far more sustainable alternative to carbon black or synthetic oils in the use of their product. So it was a pretty cool idea, very challenging to just learn about the industry, how to talk about these materials. It's a very technical industry, as you might imagine. These are all like performance engineered materials and chemicals, and that was a lot of learning that was involved. But to this day, I don't think I've had a boring day since I entered the kind of the startup world. So that was really interesting. And actually, just literally last night, I had a phone call about some very exciting news related to a potential exit for that company. So
Great.
that was a pleasing email to receive. And then in the midst of working at Boulder Industries, I just got really interested in whiskey. We moved to Brooklyn. I learned that New York has a long and rich history of making whiskey. We typically associate Kentucky with whiskey, and for good reason. That's the rightful sort of origin of whiskey. But New York had just an explosion of craft distilleries, and so I was able to, with my wife, visit distilleries that were making whiskey in cool, new, creative ways. And through a series of, visits to these distilleries and just personal curiosity about how barrels are made and how whiskey is made and what gives it flavor and whatnot, I stumbled across an idea that I found really compelling just as a hobby, essentially. And that was 95% of the barrels used to age whiskey come from the Ozarks, mostly Missouri. And that got me thinking, I'm from Illinois, white oak is our state tree. Is anyone making whiskey that's aged in Illinois white oak barrels? And if you think about it from the perspective of wine, you plant the same grape in a different country or even on a different side of a hill, and you're going to get different flavors from that grape. So Pinot Noir grape in France is going to taste very different than a Pinot Noir grape grown in Napa Valley or Australia. And so it really got me thinking, okay, well, how would the flavor change? Because whiskey gets all of its color, most of its flavor from the white oak barrel. If you actually started targeting wood from different, the same wood, but grown in different regions of the United States. And basically, I just wanted to, I wasn't in the position to build a barrel, but I wanted to, see if I could sort of get as close to, basically create an experiment that would allow me to get a glimpse into what that looks like. And so I essentially, went out to our wood pile where, all the wood was coming from within about 20 miles. And I found some white oak and split it up. And I, had learned that during the cooperage process, the barrel building process, the wood is heated to make it more pliable. It's not heated necessarily to imbue flavor. Actually, pretty much everything around barrels was developed for practical purposes. We use white oak because it's one of the few watertight woods. So there's no reason that we chose white oak explicitly for the flavor. It just so happens that it tastes good. We use it for the practical purpose that you can put something liquid in it and it won't leak for decades. And it just happens to taste really good. And the way you build a barrel, you're taking really thick white oak staves and you need to, curve them into the shape of a barrel. And the way you do that is through heat. And that heat caramelizes some of the sugars in the wood and essentially creates all those amazing flavors that we typically associate with whiskey. So I essentially tried to replicate that process by, toasting and charring this piece of white oak. And my dad had a mason jar of moonshine that had been in the basement forever. He couldn't even remember who made it, but I tasted it and it tasted pretty darn good. And so I threw the white oak in and, was astonished that within a few days, the color had changed to this beautiful golden hue. And I, would occasionally taste it to see how the flavor was changing and was surprised to find that within, the first month, it had really taken on a lot of the flavor of the white oak. And so meanwhile, I was just really, this had sort of spurred my curiosity even further. And I thought, well, geez, I've been able to extract some really interesting flavors through this infusion method. If I'm not restricted to building a barrel out of watertight wood, there are 1,000 different species of tree that grow in North America. What do the other ones taste like? And so I basically started getting my hands on as many different types of wood as I could, everything from, hardwoods to fruit woods to, different types of pine trees, and just essentially getting moonshine and putting the wood in it to infuse. And some of them tasted really good. Some of them did not taste very good. And essentially I started sharing my experiments with people. They'd come over and see all these little, essentially, little spice glass jars with sticks of wood in them, all different colors. And, it would beg the question, like, what the heck is going on here? And I would, open one up that I really liked and share it with a friend, and without telling them exactly what was going on. And people were delighted. They thought it was so cool. They, was capturing flavors that no one had ever had in whiskey before. And essentially enough people were like, well, this is kind of cool. You should see if this is something you could actually make and do. And at that point, I had was ready for a transition away from Boulder Industries. This was something I was simply doing as a hobby, you know, reading about whiskey and experimenting with putting different types of wood in whiskey, unaged whiskey, I should say, and kind of had the idea of starting Split Spirits to capture flavors from particular places. And so the thing that followed naturally from that is not only using unique wood, but then infusing it in unaged whiskey from grains grown in the same place. Because, you know, even if people are using grains local to their distillery, they're still using Missouri white oak, and there's nothing wrong with it. It tastes great, but it just means that no one is having a truly single origin spirit, and I wanted to essentially do that. So that was the impetus, you know, the long story of how Split Spirits came to be. And you know, we managed to get all the federal approvals, which was a very long, time consuming and difficult process. But we now have 3 lines, one from New York, one from Vermont, one from Illinois, all places, as you'll recall, I've lived in and have a personal connection to, but also all 3 places that have a strong agricultural and culinary heritage. And so those are the 3 Split Spirits, and it's been really fun to start my own thing. And I work with a really cool distillery up in Middlebury, Vermont, called Appalachian Gap Distillery. And, you know, by collaborating with them, was able to essentially learn about this new industry, which again was totally different than what I had done previously. So I got to, you know, learn by doing, and you know, go around to different liquor stores and bars and restaurants in New York and share their story, because I started by essentially selling their spirits and bringing prototypes of my Split Spirits along and sharing with people. So, you know, in hindsight, it was a really cool way of getting a lot of these shops sort of involved in my story and feeling like they, you know, they were in before it was actually, you know, an official thing, and was able to get a lot of really good feedback from people about, you know, by sharing it with different, you know, different customers. And then finally, once all our approvals were finished and label, you know, bottles were selected and labels were designed and printed, we started selling, and it's been great. It's been tough with the pandemic starting. Literally, bottles hit the shelves last December, which is you know, it's a good month to sell booze, especially in a smaller format like Split Spirits. It's a really cool, you know, gift size, and it's very unique, so it's eye catching. The pandemic has definitely posed some challenges, but we run pretty lean, and, you know, means I still get to do everything from splitting wood to, you know, making the batches to selling the stuff to writing articles. So never a boring day. So yeah, that's kind of the the twisting, turning path that's brought me to Split Spirits, and I'm happy to talk to any particular questions you or you think your students might have. But yeah, that's kind of the origin story.
Well, it's a great one, and I think it's fascinating. You're going to have no end of line extensions. You're going to have trees to go on for the next 100 years. But about the actual, like, running your own business part. So did you always imagine that you would at some point start something on your own? So that's one question. And then the other is, where did you go to business school? But what, you know, I hear the sort of learning the vocabulary, but do you feel like, what did you get out of sort of the MBA experience? A lot of the students are sort of asking, right? Like, do I really need to go get an MBA? What does that look like if what I want to be is an entrepreneur? So
yeah, so I always at least had the idea of starting my own company. I didn't know what form that would take, but I liked the idea. I liked the challenge. I liked the allure of being able to be involved in all aspects of it. I think that stems from my curiosity and also the desire to, like, be hands-on. I like, but also at the same time being strategic and, you know, big picture thinking. I like sort of applying my skills in that full spectrum. My dad had run his own business, and so I got to see firsthand a little bit about both the challenges and the benefits of doing that. So I had some exposure, and I just, a lot of my friends that I met at Middlebury and then at business school, I just sort of gravitated towards people who ended up doing fairly entrepreneurial things, whether working for startups or being sort of entrepreneurial within organizations, larger organizations. I think that's one distinction. It's like, you don't have to be an entrepreneur and start your own business. You can bring that same entrepreneurial spirit to pretty much anything you do. And in hindsight, I don't think I knew that going into it, but in hindsight, that's kind of the role I played at JBT. I was crossing boundaries that not I was crossing structural boundaries
right.
that people tended not to cross in a way that was bringing people together in creative ways. Creating sort of entrepreneurial projects within the larger context of the business. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind, is that, entrepreneurship doesn't always have to be synonymous with a startup necessarily, or starting your own venture. I think there's a lot of benefit to learning by doing within different types of companies, because if you're a successful, startup founder, you're going to go through all the stages of, being the only person doing everything and trying to solve all the problems, because you can't turn to anyone else. You can rely on advice from friends and stuff like that, but it all ultimately comes back to you. Lots of things you can learn at a small company or, small NGO about, working with teams. And, at the end of the day, it all comes down to people. Whether it's your customers or your coworkers or your investors or suppliers, there's a lot of like tangible things that are involved in a business, but they all sort of come down to people. And so I think there's benefits to getting experience in lots of different areas, partially to learn what your skills are, what sort of context you enjoy working in, but also sometimes as beneficial, helping you understand, where your weaknesses are and what types of organizations you don't enjoy, or aspects of those organizations you would organize differently if it were up to you. So I think in hindsight, it was great to be able to work at a really big publicly traded company, work at a small startup that was, still hadn't even sold its first product, worked at a small sort of boutique architecture firm. It gave me a glimpse into a lot of different ways of bringing people together on projects that all had some sort of, purpose behind them. And in terms of business school, I went to University of Chicago, Booth at night, which I liked because it allowed me to continue to work and make money, most practically speaking, but then also apply what I was doing during my daytime at my job to what I was learning at night, and vice versa. So it sort of turned into like a living laboratory of ideas and practices and stuff like that, which was really cool. There's probably less camaraderie and a less strong network that you develop going to school at night, but at the same time, you're with people who are hustling really hard at night. And so I really got to meet some amazing people. And that's, lots of people will tell you, like, one of the best things is just that network of people. You're surrounded by very smart people, very ambitious people. So it's going to push you. It's going to expose you to new ideas, different perspectives. And then, give you at least a functional understanding of all the different aspects that you'll need to run a successful business. I wouldn't say it prepared me to be an expert in any one thing, but it's given me enough exposure to accounting, to marketing, to entrepreneurial selling, to, the concept of money and banking, to at least be conversant and understand where I need to reach out to experts to help me, do X, Y, or Z in my business. So sort of gave me a good playbook, but not the expertise necessarily to do any one of those things perfectly. And that's also not what I went to business school for. Some people come out, having focused on accounting because that's already the realm they're working in. They want to become even more expert in it. I approached it similar to a liberal arts degree, where I was coming from a perspective of having really no background in the world of business and economics and sort of finance. So wanted to basically absorb as much as I could and become as get an exposure to as broad of a spectrum of that as well, knowing that I wanted to eventually start my own thing. And so it wouldn't behoove me to become an expert in just one thing or another. I wanted to have enough perspective so that I knew when it came time, when I did start my own thing, like, okay, I'm not an accountant, but I know I know in broad strokes, like these are the things that are important, and I need to hire, a CPA to do X, Y, and Z for me, or when it comes time to raise money, how to create an ROI and forecast, and talk to investors about the economic potential of my undertaking. So everyone goes to business school for different reasons, and those are the reasons I went to business school. And so in that regard, it served me well, and connected me with some really cool people, one of whom I actually was just climbing with last weekend. So, it doesn't it's not limited strictly to sort of quote unquote business relationships. You'll get to meet some really smart, interesting people that will just, become great friends. So yeah, hopefully that answered your questions related to,
For sure.
to business school and starting my own business.
Yeah, no, somehow, though I didn't send you a detailed list of things, you hit all the highlights of the things that we've been talking about the whole time. So it's working out great. We're using the audio field guide for human-centered design. So a lot of the teams are working on sustainability design challenges and sort of non-standard business plans about all kinds of interesting problems. So I think your sort of trajectory will help them with the sort of slightly sideways way I've approached talking to them about entrepreneurship. We actually started the course with personality typing. We use the Enneagram to identify our own personality types, and then sort of think about how those look in teams and how we use them for decision making. So the people point, they've definitely heard a few times, and I'm always glad when people reinforce that, because at the end of the day, our life is only a series of connections and relationships and interactions and, the collage of moments. And so it's been great. I'm so glad that Lucas, Will and I have a mutual friend who put us in contact, and I'm so glad he did, because I think, I certainly have had a similarly windy path to the various assorted things that I've done, but I think the windy paths are the good ones, and of course I'm wildly biased in that assertion, wildly. So, I'm at least giving the disclaimer that that's my bias, but I think, taking the next thing and learning what you can from it and taking the opportunities when you can. I think the other part of your story that I find so interesting is sort of the purposeful step-aways to go do sort of your own adventures outside of your work life. Has that just naturally occurred, or did you have an example for that in family members or in acquaintances, or is that just your I can only do so much of this before I need a break?
Yeah, and I do want to come back to the sustainability of Split Spirits in particular, because I didn't actually talk about that in detail, and that's a big part of what I'm doing with Split Spirits. But to address your question about taking a step away to do something for yourself, an adventure, and shake things up, I did. My parents have always been really interested in travel. They shortly before having me, they went over to China for a 7-month bike trip back in the early 80s, back right when it had started to open up, and they, took an official tour. That was kind of how they got into the country. And then instead of, leaving, they kind of snuck past a few checkpoints and made their way into the hinterlands.
Yeah.
So, adventure travel has always been sort of, part of, on my radar, so to speak. But, it's just something that I find really helps keep me centered and motivated. I really enjoy, I just enjoy exploring places and exploring places like with my body, whether it's hiking or canoeing or climbing or biking or whatever. But also I do think it, there's the concept of like punctuated equilibrium, throughout the evolution of species on this planet. And not that I think that takes a little bit more of a darker turn, but I think there is something to be said for taking deliberate breaks, and it gets harder to do. And there's a lot of there's a lot of pushback against doing that, and I understand that. I think generally speaking, though, that there's been more of a embrace of the concept of either taking a gap semester or a gap year. And again, it kind of comes back to like what you do with that and what your intention is. But for me, it's about learning about people and learning about the world and just sort of humbling myself in the face of different perspectives, different ways of life. Obviously, it's a very privileged thing to be able to travel to places, and it is inherently personal, and there's a selfish component because it's something that's fun and fulfilling. But I think at the same time, in a world that's becoming so much more globally connected and unfortunately right now more contentious, I think forcing yourselves into positions that are outside of your comfort zone physically and mentally, and having that interaction with people from different walks of life, different economic situations, different cultural backgrounds is helpful in just, reminding you that not everyone thinks the same way and not everyone has had the same background. And it's just fun. You get cool ideas, and it's, we're not, this is my personal philosophy. We're not all put here to, make a bunch of money and die. That's what some people care about. But for me, one of the things that I love about Split Spirits and is it allows me to do that. It integrates a lot of my interests. If you had asked me when I graduated from college, I still had all the same interests. Maybe I've honed my interest in whiskey since then, but I love to travel, loved making things, loved cooking and exploring flavors, eating, in different countries, loved talking with people and telling stories, and all of those things have come to bear in what I'm doing with Split Spirits. If I wanted to make a bunch of money, I probably would be doing something differently. I'm confident that Split Spirits is going to continue to grow, but there are easier paths to the economic well-being. So, I think, part of it is just the allure of being able to pursue interest and curiosity in a way that's really fun and fulfilling. Like I've said before, I haven't had a boring day. Not to say all the days are good, but I have not had a boring day in a very long time.
Yeah.
But then real quick, just a bit on sustainability. That's not that, if you go to the website or, look at the packaging, it's not something that we like shout from the rooftops, but it's something deeply important to me. And so in looking at how we made Split Spirits, it was really important for me to work directly with farmers that were growing grains in a way that built soil health and soil fertility rather than depleting it, which is how a lot of conventional farming is happening. It relies on inputs and a slow degradation of soil fertility. And that just
Sure.
may work for now, but that's not a winning formula by any means. I understand that it might be the most economically compelling way to do things, but that doesn't mean it's right. And, in distilled spirits, the cost of grain is surprisingly small. The cost of the bottle, for example, is the single largest, well, labor, other than labor, but in terms of materials, the bottle is the most expensive thing. So I decided that I'm willing to pay, a 50% premium to buy grain that's being grown in a responsible manner. Not only because it allows me to tell that story in marketing and sales, which is important, but that I can do, I can rest easy knowing that I'm not adding to the challenges that our agricultural system faces. And then from the component of the wood, one of the wild things I learned when I was, delving into the whole cooperage, barrel making world is that it takes a 100-year-old oak tree and you only get 2 barrels from each oak tree, which is kind of wild. So we basically use wood from woodlots that aren't suitable for other forms of making wood. So, or I should say other marketable forms. So it was just our own way of basically reducing our environmental impact.
Yeah, I love that.
Hey, can I do a little pause?
Sure.
I gotta take a bathroom break. I'll be right back. So I'd say one of the things that I would keep in mind is if you pursue the things that you find interesting and meaningful, you're much more likely to be successful. It's just going to give you the extra motivation to, put in another hour of work or, do that extra research that's going to result in, your success in your career, just because you've got that deeper motivation. And that's worked for me, pursuing sustainability in all of its unusual forms throughout the winding path of my career up to this point. But sort of having that North Star of something that you really want to address or change or learn more about, it's just going to make the work you do, oftentimes, which is not always fun, they call it work for a reason. It's going to have that deeper undercurrent of meaning and motivation. And I would say also put yourselves in positions where you will challenge yourself, challenge your skills, challenge your perspectives. And even though that might be challenging in the moment, it's going to mean that you're going to be a more well-rounded person, a more valuable employee, better suited to start your own enterprise if that's the direction you want to take. And, we're on this earth for as long as we are. It might seem like a long time, but, the grand scheme of things, it's a blip. And so do something you be proud to tell your grandchildren about. There are so many issues we face in this world, and there's so many ways to do well by doing good that, the sky's the limit. And don't forget to have fun. That's really important too. That'll make people want to be around you, especially if you're trying to gather a team. People matter, and how you deal with people matter. So if you treat people with respect and a positive attitude, you're going to attract those people, and you're going to be able to get the best people, and that's how you grow a successful company. It's not a zero-sum game. We all want to be treated with respect. It's the golden rule, and I think it's one that we all kind of need to be reminded of right now. We don't do any of these things alone. Even if you might start something on your own, you're never going to grow it to a big successful company on your own. So, be respectful of people, be empathetic, be positive. So those are some of the things I suppose I'd leave with students.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And the students will give video feedback about like what they got out of it. So I'll certainly let you know what their feedback and responses were. All right, guys, that's it for today, and I will see you again on Monday.
Fantastic.